Hello and welcome to another episode of Smart Freight Conversations, where we share interesting and important information and updates about freight decarbonization and the drive towards a zero-emissions logistics industry. I'm Andy Golding, Head of Academy here at Smart Freight Center, or SFC, as you'll hear us call it, and I'm your host for today. Today, we're exploring collaboration in its many forms and how it enables meaningful progress in logistics decarbonization. We'll be talking about the different types of collaboration, the value of collaboration, and some of the pathways to engage in impactful partnerships to establish and stimulate collaboration. Joining me for this episode is our Senior Director here at Smart Freight Center, Rik Arends. Let's dive into today's episode. Rik, cool to have you here.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for inviting me for this next Smart Freight Conversations.
How are we feeling about talking collaboration today?
Well, it's always a trick question already, because on the one hand, collaboration, of course, is critical. If we talk about logistics in general, inherently that's about collaboration. Any cargo owner or shipper will recognize that they've outsourced their logistics to a supplier, be it a logistics service provider or a carrier. And they need to collaborate together simply to move goods from A to B. And yet, I find it sometimes also a very shallow term. It's also a term used to hide things. Let's collaborate. And if there's no intent, then what does that mean? We can work together. It's also just a shallow term to allow people to do nothing, to inact sometimes.
So what we want to do today is look at how do we get past that kind of first rate, let's collaborate, to let's actually collaborate and let's move things forward.
Exactly. And that's where the crux is. You can't just say like, oh, let's collaborate and end the conversation there.
Yeah.
Let's collaborate needs to say like, okay, but what's next then? How do we do this? What is it that we want to get together? What's the achievements that we want to move forward? And that's where you really start on the real conversations. Because everyone, I think there's very few people that say like, oh no, let's not collaborate.
Yeah, especially as you say, if collaboration is so ingrained in logistics, in the movement of goods, it relies on collaboration.
Inherent. And there's always all these intermediary steps that need to work. And that's why logistics is such a fascinating subject as well. And where collaboration is at the core of everything that you need to do. Because any logistics movement from A to B has a multitude of actors involved. And then trying to say, like, okay, let's move this onto zero-emission logistics. How do we actually decarbonize that? How do we get that? That needs all of the individual actors in that supply chain or value chain need the corresponding acts. And that's where real collaboration then starts to emerge.
Yeah, because nothing changes if nothing changes, and nothing can change if nobody's willing to kind of shift and change and go in new directions.
And now you open up a really nice start of a good conversation where you say, like, okay, but who is the first to move? In this supply chain or in a value chain, who's the one going to act upon this? Who's feeling the pain of the actual emissions incurred, or who's willing to incentivize certain goals to be achieved?
And so who, from your experience, where is it initiated?
Yeah, so we've done some work actually over the past year, in the past years within the Sustainable Freight Buyers Alliance, where we work very closely with the cargo owners on how do you move your goods around the world, and how do you actually incentivize in your supply chain and your suppliers to move to logistics? And that's really published in a great report actually at the end of last year called Net Zero Logistics Delivered, where we gained all this insight from 50 individual companies. And one of the most interesting ones that we see, there's actually probably two market mechanisms, two really important recognitions there. On the one hand, you have the cargo owners, which are usually what we call on the top of the food chain. They are actually the ones asking, can my goods be moved?
Yeah.
And simply because they ask, they also have the right to ask, can it be moved sustainably? And therefore, they are also the ones to incentivize and to create that market on how do you actually move things logistically on zero emission. Of course, then suppliers need to respond.
Yeah.
And that's where then you get into a bit of back and forth, who's willing to pay, what's the price you're willing, but at least that's where the starting point is as far as, Also, cargo owners feel it from a pressure point. And then there's the second group that is willing to move on sustainable logistics, which is a bit more personal usually, is a bit more family oriented, is those that are intrinsically motivated. It's doing it for the right thing.
Doing it because it's the right thing to do.
The right thing to do. It's because of family, usually family owned, often as well. So we actually family-owned businesses usually have a bit more incentivized structures behind this, or it's because an organization feels very dearly about the environment and therefore are willing to act and therefore asks their, say, supply chain or value chain or ecosystem that they are part of to make that move.
That's a really interesting observation, that you've got the cargo owners who have that pressure from the market and global pressure, regulatory pressure, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then there's that very distinct second group. But essentially to move towards zero emissions logistics, we need all actors to come to the party.
Yes.
And there's so many different types of collaboration. We say collaboration, but if you kind of take the lid off that pot, there's a lot happening in that. So when we talk about the different types of collaboration, horizontal, vertical, ecosystem-wide collaboration, from your perspective, how do all of these different types of collaboration come together to contribute to decarbonization overall?
Yeah, so if you peel it off, so you have that 3 levels, as you already mentioned, and the most obvious one is the vertical type, right? So it's you as a cargo owner working with your logistics service provider, and simply making the ask to change. So you make the ask to change fuel. And by fueling HVO is a common or a renewable diesel in certain countries, or B100, you already have that type of ask, or ask to fill it up with a significant proportion of sustainable aviation fuels, marine fuels. You can make it ask. That's a vertical. You can argue if it's collaboration or procurement mechanism, but I think those two go hand in hand, actually.
Sometimes collaboration is maybe a bit of a forcing function.
It's a forcing function. And then sometimes it's first you collaborate to make it work, and then actually you make it into a procurement mechanism. Or after you've done the procurement mechanism, you need to collaborate. A good example was I visited one of the companies, one of the Danish companies, and they said, actually, we first went into a procurement mechanism to get the alternative fuels in place, but subsequently we spent months and months working together to get this right, to get the accounting systems right, to get the financing systems right, to get the actual, all of the requirements behind this to be right. But then there's a second layer, which we talked about, is the horizontal kind of collaboration, which I think is a really interesting one, where you see 2 cargo owners are willing to share their loads and therefore optimize their logistics in return. This is an age-old traditional type of collaboration, and we have all this type of less than transport load, or less than a truckload type of considerations, or groupage type of services that exist from logistic service providers. But it is kind of this horizontal collaboration where you make it work to actually optimize the loading, and because you optimize the loading, you actually are more efficient and you burn less fuel, and that reduces emissions. And by allowing that flexibility a little bit, and going back to your procurement, allowing the flexibility early on, it helps. And then the most interesting one, and that's probably where most efforts also go from Smart Freight Center side sometimes, is how do you actually make the ecosystem play?
Yep.
This is where the really new stuff comes in. So if you talk about, for example, the electric trucks, you technically can purchase an electric truck, or your supplier can purchase an electric truck or lease it and deploy it. In reality, that is not how it works.
Not that simple.
It's not that simple, because you have then all the combination of, like, the economics need to work. And for the economics to work, you need as many routes and as many lanes to be utilizing that same truck. That doesn't usually fall with one cargo owner, that comes with multiple cargo owners, which means the multiple cargo owners need to work together. Then you have your suppliers, and then you have they need charging infrastructure in place. Charging infrastructure needs all kind of location-based type of infrastructure. If it's back to base type of operation, then it's easy. But imagine you're going long haul.
Yeah.
Then you need intermediary routes, etc. So you open up a second box. Then the third box is, these trucks are actually expensive.
Yeah.
They don't come at the same pricing. So your whole pricing structure changes, which means that you need financing sector comes in. Who is willing to lend this type of money to a small trucker that has maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 trucks? And how are they suddenly going to pay a double type of investment they need to make? That means that they need trust in that SME. That means certain guarantees to be provided. Now, then you get the financing sector in place. And then I haven't talked about outside of the logistics sector. I'm talking about the grids requirements, etc. So, or the renewable energy, etc. So there's a whole world behind it. But all of those players suddenly need to work together to get simply electric trucks on the road.
Yeah. And until you lift the lid off that pot, do you think, oh, we'll just buy an electric truck and stick it on the road? And
that's easy. We swap one truck for the other, and then you realize, oh no, it's actually not so easy.
No.
And that's where really the ecosystem collaboration takes place and needs to be facilitated. That's what we do
here at Smart Freight Center.
Yes.
Yeah. That's, I think, I would say probably our superpower is being able to bring all of those different parties together for that ecosystem type collaboration.
Yeah. And then it's really critical, of course. So if we talk about how do we get there, it starts, of course, building that trust. You're not suddenly sharing type of data or your insights or strategies if you don't build that trust with the other person that's on the other side of the room.
Would you say that trust is a requirement for successful collaboration?
Absolutely. You can't go into collaboration without without the trust there. I remember as well, we had 2 years ago, actually, it's quite a while ago, we had a consultancy firm supporting us, and they said, look, we facilitated kind of collaboration, horizontal collaboration on a fishery to logistics of the fish to and from the sea. And there were 2 companies that individually had their own boats, and etc. They said, look, we can collaborate. We actually need only 1 boat instead of 2 to make that happen. But it was between 2 major fishing companies to make that happen. They said one of the things that we do is that we make the CEOs of both companies meet once a year to say that we renew the vows almost. We trust each other. We actually work together on getting this 1 boat operational, etc. And then there's a whole world behind that, of course, on logistics, practical, financial arrangements, etc. But it was needed to get all the way to the CEOs and to be renewed every year.
Yeah.
We trust each other.
Yeah.
There's no backdoor channels here being considered, but really that trust level needs to be built in all the way to the CEO.
I love that. I love that we renew our vows every year, because it's ultimately when we're collaborating, yes, we can say huge company A and huge company B are working together, but actually it's just a couple of people from each company who need to get on the same page, establish the trust, and just get the thing going.
Yeah, and you can put everything in contracts, you can put it in legal language, you can do it in procurement mechanisms, and all will need to happen.
Yeah.
Of course, behind these 2 fisheries, there was a contract.
Yeah.
There was a multi-party contract, there was NDAs in place, etc. But at least you needed all the way at the CEO level to say, we're going to do this together.
Yeah.
And that's so critical to make this type of collaborations work.
So trust, we know, is absolutely, it's one of the critical requirements or critical structures or conditions to make collaboration efforts effective. Any other patterns that you've observed across successful initiatives? Obviously, trust is a precursor, but what other conditions do companies need to look for collaboration to be successful?
So I would say you also need to have an open mindset. And what I mean by that is actually you also need to be able to relate to the other partner.
Okay.
So that's maybe a second aspect. So because you come from sometimes different industries, so you speak different language, different way of working, different incentive mechanisms,
and maybe different priorities, competing priorities.
If you're able to have that transparency and openness to each other, that really helps. I think a third ingredient of making successful collaboration happen is also having a neutral facilitator. So having a third party that has no commercial interest as such, or is not necessarily in taking stock as part of the actual collaboration that takes place, really works.
Yeah.
That maybe that collaboration can only facilitate if you have those neutral facilitator, and the various kind of non-profits, or sometimes a consultancy, or sometimes it can be an intermediary that can play that role in this case.
So those intermediaries play a critical role. We've got open-mindedness, we've got trust. So some of the critical ingredients for effective collaboration. And we also know that sometimes collaboration can come with different trade-offs, like shared risk or reduced flexibility, not in terms of mindset, but in terms of movement of goods, timing, etc.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges or misconceptions that you see, particularly when you're working across different stakeholders?
So when you actually think about what are some of the trade-offs or the risks associated with collaboration, it's really also, besides what we shared already about, like, okay, you need to be trusted and incentivize, have an open mindset. You also need to ensure what's the incentive mechanisms behind this. And I would always argue as well to be fairly open and transparent about some of the commercials behind this. So you can't talk about collaboration on a project basis. Sometimes it's okay to do it with closed books. But if you want to scale collaboration, you want to do it at scale, you need to talk about the money. Who is making the investments? Who is willing to make those investments?
Yeah.
And that comes with always the monetary value or the commercialization of the collaboration itself is because you have certain risks associated. And who is willing to take which risks in it? And that's where then the uniqueness of every collaboration emerges. Because every individual organization has a certain way and a certain risk appetite that they're willing to take. And I'll give you an example. There was recently some of the companies in the UK said, look, we would like to electrify our road freight operations in this region. And one of the companies said, look, sure, and work with the supplier, which was a family-owned organization. The family-owned organization said, look, we have about 50 trucks. We're swapping them all, well, 20 out of them, we're swapping them for electric. On which the other organization, oof, that's a lot. That's actually, they said, no, we trust you. We have done this. The only thing that we ask from you as an organization is to continue our business. And that's okay. And that's where you see, and this was built on a 15-year collaboration that these organizations had. So they worked for 15 years together, and this family-owned organization said, I trust this fully. Others will say, I don't have this risk appetite. I can't just swap out 20 trucks for electric. Yeah. I need a much more concrete, legally binding risk appetite to be borne by you. And we'll put this in writing, and these are the contractual clauses, and etc. And it's also fine.
Yeah.
And we'll make that work. And then it depends on how do you actually facilitate that type of discussions, and how much trust is there between the individuals that are on the table on either side to make that happen.
So it doesn't really matter which way we get there, provided trust is there as a core ingredient, and flexibility and willingness to shift some things around. There's multiple routes. There's so many different ways to collaborate, to get started. So I think we could probably sit here having this conversation for a good long time, but I'm thinking about an organization who has the willingness and has the appetite to firstly take bigger steps in terms of their decarbonization and willingness to collaborate, wants to find parties to work with. If I'm that person, how do I start? Like, what's the first step that I can take to leverage or do more in terms of collaboration?
Well, I think a very easy or relatively easy, but step is not always super clear. What's your intent?
Okay.
Be intentional about the collaboration that you want. If you want to say, like, I want to work with my peers, then be intentional about what do you want to collaborate about. Do you want to share loads, for example, and therefore optimize and say, like, I'm willing to share between two pharma companies. I'm willing to share the loads in one container and therefore optimize my logistics network. And I know I'll reduce but be aware then of that intentional collaboration that needs comes with certain risks. And be willing to accept or be flexible around those risks that you're willing to take. And then also be prepared to say, like, I'm willing to to foot the bill first or to change some of the commercials, but be willing also to have that commercial mindset of commercial collaboration. Sorry, commercial language to be included in the conversations. But where you want to, back to your question, where to start, is be intentional about the collaboration. And don't use it as a shallow word for like, let's collaborate, and then end the conversation there.
Yeah, be intentional about what you want to achieve, and also be specific, I think, about, I like the example that you gave of, I'm looking to collaborate. Is it my industry peers that I want to collaborate with? So, all right, the person who wants to get started, a good place to start is by setting some intentions, getting specific about what you want. Any final words of advice for companies who are just getting started on collaboration, or who want to move further, do more than what they're currently doing?
So maybe a good starting point, of course, as well, is to actually join some of those smart freight conversations. Be aware of what your peers are doing. Join a community just as Smart Freight Center exists, but also be aware of the trainings that exist, so you can actually ensure you have your knowledge leveled up, so to say. So when you speak about intentions and you're intentional, what is possible, you can actually speak from some sort of truth, and not just from a wish list in this case.
Super. So there you have it. Be intentional, come in with flexibility. It needs to be grounded in trust. And just, I think flexibility is really the one that jumps out at me. Is that collaboration is going to, nothing changes if nothing changes. If we want to collaborate effectively, some things are going to have to give or take. So come in with intention and flexibility, rely on trust, lean into trust. And I think that's a great place to leave our conversation for today. Rik, thank you so much for joining me. That's a wrap on today's conversation. Thank you for joining us. And remember to lean into trust, bring flexibility with you. And if you want to know more about leveling up your collaboration, or even how to get started, check out the Smart Freight Center and the Smart Freight Center Academy. We have loads of resources available to help you do that.